This book was generated using Speaktor's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.
In the heart of Victorian London, creativity pulsed through the veins of artistic circles. This vibrant atmosphere nurtured the talents of painters, poets, and visionaries alike, setting the stage for extraordinary encounters. Basil Hallward, a gifted painter with a soul as sensitive as his brushstrokes, found himself caught in the whirlwind of this artistic renaissance. His studio, a sanctuary of light and color, had seen the birth of many beautiful works, but nothing could have prepared him for the day Dorian Gray walked into his life. The moment Dorian entered the room, the air seemed to shimmer. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, catching the golden strands of his hair, creating a halo effect that took Basil's breath away. Time stood still as the painter's eyes traced the perfect lines of Dorian's face, a face that could have been plucked from a Renaissance masterpiece. Basil's heart raced, his palms grew damp. Words tumbled from his lips before he could stop them, an invitation to his studio. Dorian's smile, warm and inviting, melted away Basil's usual reserve. The young man's presence was intoxicating, filling the room with an energy that was almost palpable. As Dorian began to visit regularly, Basil's studio transformed. The space that had once been a solitary retreat now buzzed with life. The scratch of charcoal on paper, the soft swish of brush on canvas, the gentle lilt of Dorian's voice. These sounds became a symphony that Basil never wanted to end. With each session, Basil's feelings deepened. What had started as artistic appreciation blossomed into something more profound, more personal. He found himself looking forward to their time together with an eagerness that both thrilled and terrified him. The portrait he was creating became more than just a painting. It was a declaration of admiration, a testament to the effect Dorian had on him. Basil's growing attachment manifested in a fierce protectiveness. He began to guard their time together jealously, reluctant to share Dorian with the outside world. The thought of introducing him to others, especially his worldly and cynical friend Lord Henry Wotton, filled Basil with dread. Lord Henry's sharp wit and decadent philosophies were like poison to Basil's ears. He could almost see them seeping into Dorian's pure soul, tainting his innocence. The very idea made Basil's stomach churn with anxiety. Despite his best efforts, Basil couldn't keep Dorian in a bubble forever. The young man's beauty and charm were like a beacon, drawing people to him like moths to a flame. Basil watched with a mixture of pride and fear as Dorian began to spread his wings, venturing out into London's glittering social scene. As the portrait neared completion, Basil found himself at a crossroads. His feelings for Dorian had grown into something he could no longer ignore, yet he knew he must conceal them at all costs. The weight of his secret pressed down on him, threatening to crush his spirit. In quiet moments when Dorian's gaze was turned away, Basil allowed himself to dream of a world where their connection could be acknowledged openly. But reality always intruded, harsh and unforgiving, reminding him of the societal norms that bound them. With a heavy heart, Basil realized that his masterpiece was both a blessing and a curse. It had brought Dorian into his life, but it also served as a constant reminder of what he could never have. As he put the finishing touches on the portrait, Basil struggled to conceal the depth of his attachment, a love that dared not speak its name. As the final brushstroke dried on the canvas, a knock at the studio door shattered the peaceful atmosphere. Basil's heart sank as he recognized the sharp, aristocratic tones of Lord Henry Wotton. The door swung open, revealing the charismatic figure of his friend, his eyes already fixed on Dorian with dangerous interest. Basil felt a chill run down his spine, sensing that this moment would change everything. Lord Henry Wotton was a charismatic and dangerously influential aristocrat. His sharp wit and hedonistic philosophy were renowned in London's high society circles. On this particular summer day, he decided to pay a visit to his friend Basil Hallward's studio, unaware that this seemingly ordinary call would set in motion a chain of events that would forever alter the lives of those present. The afternoon sun bathed the streets of London in a golden glow as Lord Henry's carriage clattered to a stop outside Basil's studio. The air was thick with the scent of blooming roses from nearby gardens, mingling with the acrid smell of smoke from distant factories. As he stepped out onto the cobblestone street, Lord Henry adjusted his immaculate silk cravat and strode purposefully toward the studio door. The moment he crossed the threshold, Lord Henry was enveloped by the familiar aroma of oil paints and turpentine. The studio was awash in warm, natural light that streamed through the large windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. Canvases in various states of completion lined the walls, each one a testament to Basil's artistic genius. But it wasn't the artwork that caught Lord Henry's attention. His gaze was immediately drawn to a young man of extraordinary beauty, posing on a raised platform in the center of the room. The youth's golden curls caught the sunlight, creating a halo effect that seemed almost ethereal. His skin was flawless, like polished marble, and his features were so perfectly sculpted that they could have been chiseled by Michelangelo himself. "Ah, Basil," Lord Henry drawled, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "Who is this exquisite creature you've been hiding from the world?" Basil looked up from his canvas, a flicker of unease crossing his face. His paintbrush hovered mid-stroke, leaving a streak of vibrant blue suspended in the air. "This is Dorian Gray, Henry. Dorian, may I introduce Lord Henry Wotton?" Dorian turned, his piercing blue eyes meeting Lord Henry's gaze. There was an innocence in those eyes that stirred something in the older man, a desire to mold, to influence, to corrupt. It was like looking at a blank canvas, ripe with potential. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Lord Henry," Dorian said, his voice as melodious as his appearance suggested. He stepped down from the platform, moving with a grace that belied his youth. Lord Henry circled the young man like a predator, sizing up its prey. His eyes raked over Dorian's form, taking in every perfect detail. "The pleasure is all mine, I assure you. Tell me, Dorian, are you aware of the gift you possess?" Dorian's brow furrowed in confusion, creating a small crease between his eyebrows. "Gift, my lord? Why, your youth and beauty, of course," Lord Henry exclaimed, his eyes glittering with mischief. He reached out and lightly touched Dorian's shoulder, feeling the warmth of his skin through the thin fabric of his shirt. "They are the most precious commodities in this dreary world of ours. You must make the most of them while you can." Basil cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. His paintbrush tapped nervously against the palette, mixing colors without purpose. "Henry, perhaps we should discuss something else." But Lord Henry was not to be deterred. He launched into a passionate discourse on the virtues of youth, beauty, and pleasure. His words flowed like honey, sweet and intoxicating, seeping into Dorian's impressionable mind. The studio seemed to fade away, leaving only Lord Henry's voice echoing in Dorian's ears. "Life is a series of moments, my dear boy," Lord Henry purred, his voice dropping to a seductive whisper. "Each one more fleeting than the last. It is our duty, nay, our right, to squeeze every drop of pleasure from those moments before they slip away." Dorian listened, enraptured. It was as if a veil had been lifted from his eyes, revealing a world of possibilities he had never before considered. The fear of aging, of losing his beauty, began to take root in his heart like a poisonous seed. He could feel his pulse quickening, his palms growing damp with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. As Lord Henry spoke, Basil continued to work on the portrait, his brush strokes becoming more agitated. The soft scraping of bristles against canvas provided a rhythmic backdrop to Lord Henry's words. Basil could see the change happening in Dorian's eyes, a spark of something dangerous and alluring, like a flame flickering to life in the darkness. "Henry," Basil interrupted, his voice strained. He set down his brush with more force than necessary, causing a small splash of paint to mar the edge of the canvas. "Perhaps we should let Dorian rest. He's been posing for hours." But Dorian shook his head, his gaze never leaving Lord Henry. His cheeks were flushed with excitement, his eyes bright with newfound understanding. "No, please, I want to hear more." Lord Henry smiled, a cat who had caught the canary. He continued to weave his web of words, extolling the virtues of self-indulgence and the pursuit of pleasure above all else. The afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across the studio floor. The air grew thick with the weight of unspoken desires and shifting loyalties. Basil watched helplessly as his muse was transformed before his eyes, Lord Henry's influence taking hold like a fever. The portrait on the easel seemed to change with each passing moment, reflecting the subtle shifts in Dorian's expression and posture. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the London skyline, Dorian Gray stood on the precipice of a new understanding of himself and the world around him. The seeds of vanity, self-indulgence, and a paralyzing fear of aging had been planted deep within his psyche, ready to grow and shape the course of his life in ways none of them could yet imagine. The studio fell into an eerie silence as Lord Henry's final words hung in the air. Dorian's eyes darted between the two men, his mind racing with newfound possibilities. Basil, sensing the profound change in his young friend, turned back to his canvas with renewed urgency. His brush moved with feverish intensity, capturing the last vestiges of Dorian's innocence before it slipped away forever. As night descended upon London, the portrait of Dorian Gray neared completion. But what dark secrets would it reveal when the final brushstroke fell? Basil Hallward's brush danced across the canvas with graceful precision. The final strokes of his masterpiece, the portrait of Dorian Gray, were taking shape before his eyes. The air in the studio hung heavy with the scent of oil paints and turpentine, a fragrant testament to the artist's dedication. Dorian stood transfixed, his eyes wide with wonder as he gazed upon his own image. The painting seemed to pulse with life, capturing every nuance of his youthful perfection. Golden curls framed a face of angelic innocence, eyes sparkling with the promise of adventures yet to come. It was as if Basil had not merely painted Dorian, but had somehow trapped his very essence on the canvas. "It's extraordinary," Dorian whispered, his voice barely audible in the hushed studio. His fingers twitched at his sides, itching to reach out and touch the still wet paint, to confirm that this miracle was real. Basil stepped back, a mixture of pride and trepidation etched on his face. He knew he had created something truly special, perhaps too special. The brush trembled slightly in his hand as he set it down, aware that he had crossed some invisible line in his art. Lord Henry, lounging nearby with his ever-present cigarette, watched the scene unfold with keen interest. Smoke curled lazily around his head, adding to the dreamlike quality of the moment. His sharp eyes darted between Dorian and the portrait, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. As Dorian continued to stare at his portrait, a shadow passed over his features. Lord Henry's earlier words about the fleeting nature of youth and beauty echoed in his mind, a discordant note in the symphony of his admiration. The joy of seeing his own perfection captured forever was suddenly tainted by the cruel realization that the portrait would remain unchanged while he, the living Dorian, would wither and age. The weight of his mortality crashed down upon him like a tidal wave. Dorian's hands clenched at his sides, his knuckles white with tension. The beauty that had moments ago filled him with elation now seemed a curse, a cruel reminder of what he was destined to lose. "If only," Dorian began, his voice trembling with emotion, "if only it were the other way around. If only the picture could change, and I could stay as I am now, forever young, forever perfect." The words hung in the air, heavy with desperation. Basil and Lord Henry exchanged glances, unsure how to respond to the young man's sudden anguish. The ticking of a nearby clock seemed to grow louder, each second a mocking reminder of time's relentless march. Dorian's eyes blazed with a fervent light as he continued, his voice rising with each word. "I would give anything for that, anything in the world. I would give my soul." The passion in his declaration seemed to make the very air in the studio vibrate. For a moment, time seemed to stand still, as if some unseen force was considering Dorian's impulsive wish. The candles flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and a chill breeze swept through the room, rustling papers and causing the men to shiver involuntarily. Then, as quickly as it had come, the moment passed. Dorian's shoulders slumped, the fire in his eyes dimming. He laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the suddenly quiet studio. "How foolish of me," he said, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's just a painting after all." But as Dorian turned away from the portrait, preparing to leave the studio, something imperceptible shifted. A tiny change, unnoticed by the three men, occurred in the painting. It was as if some cosmic deal had been struck, setting in motion a chain of events that would alter the course of Dorian's life forever. The portrait, now more than mere paint and canvas, had become a silent witness to Dorian's soul. It would bear the burden of his experiences, the weight of his sins, while Dorian himself remained untouched by time. The first brushstroke of corruption had been painted, invisible for now, but destined to grow with each passing day. As Dorian stepped out of the studio and into the fading light of the afternoon, he was blissfully unaware of the Faustian bargain he had unwittingly made. The portrait behind him, seemingly unchanged, held the secret of his newfound immortality, and the price he would pay for it. The sun was setting as Dorian made his way home, casting long shadows across the streets of London. A strange energy thrummed through his veins, making him feel more alive than ever before. As he turned a corner, the sound of his polished shoes clicking against the cobblestones echoed off the buildings. Suddenly, he found himself in an unfamiliar part of the city, surrounded by grimy streets that seemed to whisper dark secrets. Dorian hesitated, a shiver running down his spine. What adventures or dangers awaited him in these shadowy alleyways? Dorian's polished shoes clicked against the uneven cobblestones of grimy streets. These streets seemed to whisper secrets as he walked. The air hung heavy, a pungent cocktail of coal smoke, unwashed bodies, and cheap liquor that assaulted his senses. It was a stark contrast to the perfumed drawing rooms he frequented. Yet Dorian found himself intoxicated by the raw energy pulsing through this unfamiliar world. As night descended, gas lamps flickered to life, casting long shadows that transformed the narrow alleys into a bewildering maze. Dorian's heart raced, his breath quickening with each new sight and sound. The cacophony of life surrounded him. Raucous laughter from nearby taverns, the clatter of horse hooves on stone, and the distant strains of a street musician's melancholy tune. It was in this state of heightened awareness that Dorian stumbled upon a rundown theater. Its faded facade, peeling paint revealing glimpses of former grandeur, barely hinted at the magic that lay within. Drawn by an inexplicable force, he pushed open the creaking door and slipped inside. The musty air enveloped him like a familiar embrace, tickling his nostrils with the scent of dust and dreams. The moment Sybil Vane took the stage, time seemed to grind to a halt. Her voice, clear as a mountain stream, rang out through the dingy theater, breathing life into Shakespeare's immortal words. Dorian watched, transfixed, as she transformed before his eyes. One moment a love-struck Juliet, her face alight with innocent passion. The next a fierce Lady Macbeth, her eyes burning with ambition and madness. Night after night, Dorian returned, his obsession growing with each performance. Sybil's ability to slip in and out of characters was like watching a butterfly emerge from its chrysalis, again and again. Her talent was raw, unpolished, but all the more captivating for its purity. Dorian found himself leaning forward in his seat, breath held, afraid to miss a single nuance of her performance. As he watched her, Dorian felt something stir within him, a longing he had never experienced before. It was as if Sybil held the key to unlocking a part of himself he didn't know existed. Her performances were a mirror, reflecting back at him the myriad possibilities of human emotion and experience. He saw in her eyes the depths of love, the heights of joy, the abyss of despair, all the colors of the human experience painted in vivid strokes across the canvas of her face. Swept up in a whirlwind of passion, Dorian's infatuation quickly blossomed into what he believed to be true love. The idea of Sybil, her talent, her beauty, her innocence, became an intoxicating elixir he couldn't resist. In a moment of impulsive fervor, he proposed marriage, his heart pounding so loudly he could barely hear her breathless acceptance. Dorian's excitement was palpable as he shared his newfound joy with Lord Henry Wotton and Basil Hallward. His words tumbled out in a rush, painting Sybil as a paragon of artistic perfection. "You must see her perform," he insisted, his eyes shining with an almost feverish light. "She's unlike anyone I've ever known, so pure, so passionate. When she's on stage, it's as if the rest of the world fades away." Lord Henry raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement playing at the corners of his mouth. "My dear boy," he drawled, "you speak as if you've discovered the eighth wonder of the world." His words carried a note of skepticism that Dorian, in his euphoria, failed to notice. Basil, ever the romantic, seemed more inclined to believe in Dorian's raptures. "If she's half as talented as you say, it would be a pleasure to witness her performance," he said warmly, his kind eyes reflecting Dorian's excitement. As the day of the performance approached, Dorian's excitement grew to near unbearable levels. He paced his rooms like a caged tiger, alternating between fits of nervous energy and moments of dreamy contemplation. In his mind, he played out the scene over and over, Sybil captivating his friends with her talent, proving to them the depth and validity of his feelings. The merging of his two worlds, the sophisticated circle he moved in, and the pure, untainted realm of Sybil's art, seemed to Dorian the perfect culmination of his newfound philosophy. It was as if all the pieces of his life were finally falling into place, creating a picture of exquisite beauty and harmony. As the sun set on the day of the performance, Dorian felt a curious mix of excitement and apprehension. His palms were sweaty as he adjusted his cravat for the 100th time, his reflection in the mirror showing a young man on the cusp of something momentous. The air seemed charged with possibility, and as he stepped out into the cool evening air, Dorian couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change forever. Little did he know that fate had other plans, poised to shatter his carefully constructed illusions and set in motion a chain of events that would alter the course of his life forever. As he made his way to the theater, his heart racing with anticipation, Dorian was blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to break over his head, threatening to sweep away everything he held dear. The night of Sybil Vane's crucial performance had finally arrived. Dorian Gray, brimming with excitement, could hardly contain himself as he prepared to showcase his beloved's talent to his friends. The theater hummed with anticipation, a palpable energy crackling through the air. Dorian's heart thundered in his chest as he led Lord Henry Wotton and Basil Hallward to their seats. The plush, red velvet cushions sank beneath him, and the ornate gold leaf decorations on the walls seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Dorian's eyes darted between his companions, searching for signs of approval. Lord Henry's face remained an inscrutable mask of mild amusement, while Basil's fingers twitched slightly, as if longing for a paintbrush to capture the scene before him. The heavy curtain rose with a whisper of fabric, and there she was, Sybil Vane, bathed in the warm glow of the footlights. Dorian's breath caught in his throat, a proud smile spreading across his face. But as Sybil began to speak, that smile froze, then slowly crumbled. Gone was the passionate, skilled actress who had captivated him night after night. In her place stood a wooden puppet, her lines delivered with all the emotion of a bored schoolgirl reciting multiplication tables. Dorian's stomach churned, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. He sank lower in his seat, painfully aware of Lord Henry's raised eyebrow and the pitying glance Basil shot his way. The weight of embarrassment pressed down on him like a physical force, making it hard to breathe in the stuffy theater. As the final curtain fell, accompanied by scattered, unenthusiastic applause, Dorian bolted from his seat. He muttered hasty excuses, the words tasting like ash in his mouth, and fled backstage. The narrow corridors seemed to close in around him, amplifying the storm of emotions raging within: anger, disappointment, humiliation. He burst into Sybil's dressing room, finding her face aglow with love and excitement. The sight only stoked the flames of his fury. "What was that?" he spat, his voice trembling. Sybil's smile faltered, confusion clouding her eyes. "Dorian, my love, Don't!" He cut her off, his words sharp as knives. "You've made a fool of me. Your performance was a joke, an embarrassment." Tears welled in Sybil's eyes, her lower lip quivering as she tried to explain. "But Dorian, don't you see? I found real love with you. I can't pretend anymore. The stage feels hollow now that I've experienced true emotion." Her words fell on deaf ears. Dorian's face twisted into a cruel sneer, his handsome features distorted by rage. "Love? You call this love? You've destroyed everything. We're finished, Sybil. I never want to see you again." He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The sound of Sybil's heart-wrenching sobs followed him down the corridor, but he hardened his heart against them. The next morning dawned gray and dreary, matching Dorian's mood. Guilt gnawed at him like a hungry rat, softening the edges of his anger. He paced his opulent sitting room, considering going to Sybil, offering an apology, a chance to start anew. But before he could act on this impulse, a sharp knock at the door shattered the silence. A messenger arrived, his face grave, bearing news that would change everything. Sybil Vane had taken her own life, swallowing poison in the depths of her despair. The news should have devastated him, should have torn his world apart. Instead, a strange calm settled over Dorian. He found himself viewing Sybil's death not as a tragic loss of human life, but as a beautiful, dramatic scene, the final act in a grand performance. How wonderfully dramatic, he mused, his voice eerily detached. Sybil Vane, lying dead in some sordid lodging. There is something of the martyr about her, all the beauty of Greek tragedy. As these callous words left his lips, something shifted within Dorian Gray. The last vestiges of his innocence slipped away like sand through an hourglass, replaced by a cold, hedonistic outlook that mirrored Lord Henry's teachings. Sybil's death marked not just the end of a young life, but the beginning of Dorian's descent into moral decay. He stared at his reflection in the ornate mirror hanging on the wall, searching for some sign of the transformation he felt within. But his face remained as youthful and beautiful as ever, betraying nothing of the darkness growing in his soul. A chill ran down Dorian's spine as he realized the full weight of what had transpired. He stumbled away from the mirror, his legs suddenly weak beneath him. The room began to spin, and he grasped for something solid to anchor himself. As consciousness slipped away, one thought echoed in his mind. What have I become? Dorian Gray stumbled into his home, his mind reeling. The news of Sybil Vane's suicide had shattered his world, leaving him grappling with a storm of conflicting emotions. The familiar opulence of his drawing room seemed to mock him, its beauty untouched by the tragedy that now consumed him. Moonlight spilled through the tall windows, casting long, accusing shadows across the plush carpet. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of his guilt, and a strange, unsettling excitement that he couldn't quite suppress. His eyes were drawn inexorably to the portrait that dominated the room, Basil Hallward's masterpiece. As he approached, his heart began to race, each beat echoing in his ears like a drum. Something was different. The painted face that had once mirrored his own youthful perfection now bore a subtle, yet undeniable alteration. Dorian leaned closer, his breath catching in his throat. There, around the mouth, a touch of cruelty had appeared, a cruel twist that hadn't existed before. The brush strokes seemed to writhe under his gaze, taunting him with their newfound malevolence. It can't be, he whispered, his voice trembling like a leaf in a storm. But the evidence was undeniable. His wild, desperate wish had come true. The portrait was changing, bearing the mark of his sin, while he remained untouched by time and transgression. A dizzying mix of horror and exhilaration washed over him, threatening to sweep him off his feet. The full weight of his supernatural bargain crashed down upon him like a tidal wave, leaving him gasping for air. He was free, free to indulge every whim, every dark desire, without consequence. The portrait would bear the burden of his choices, aging and twisting with each moral failing, while he remained forever young and beautiful. But with this intoxicating freedom came a paralyzing fear that gripped his heart like an icy hand. What if someone were to discover his secret? The thought of losing his newfound power, of facing judgment for his actions, was unbearable. Dorian's eyes darted around the room, searching desperately for a solution. His gaze settled on the ceiling, and a plan began to form in his mind like a sinister flower blooming in the dark. The attic, yes, the old-school room that had long stood abandoned. It was perfect, isolated, forgotten, a place where his secret could be safely hidden away from prying eyes. "Victor!" Dorian called, his voice echoing through the silent house like a ghostly summons. His loyal servant appeared moments later, eyes heavy with sleep but alert at his master's urgent tone. "I need your help," Dorian said, forcing a calm he didn't feel into his voice. "We must move this portrait, now." Victor nodded, asking no questions as they carefully lifted the heavy frame. The journey up the creaking stairs felt endless. each step bringing Dorian closer to sealing away the evidence of his corruption. The wood groaned beneath their feet, as if protesting the weight of their dark secret. The attic air was thick with dust and forgotten memories, swirling around them like specters of the past. Dorian directed Victor to place the portrait behind a heavy, ornate screen. As the painting disappeared from view, Dorian felt a weight lift from his shoulders, replaced by a thrilling sense of possibility that made his skin tingle. "That will be all, Victor," he said, dismissing the servant with a wave of his hand. Once alone, Dorian surveyed the room. Shadows danced in the corners, and the floorboards groaned beneath his feet. It was a fitting tomb for the ugliness he would never have to face. With trembling fingers, Dorian locked the door, the click of the mechanism sounding like the sealing of a pack. He pocketed the key, feeling its weight against his chest, a constant reminder of the power he now wielded. As he descended the stairs, a smile played at the corners of his mouth. No longer the innocent grin of youth, but something darker, more dangerous. In that moment, Dorian Gray made his choice. He would embrace this gift, this curse, with every fiber of his being. The world lay before him, ripe with pleasures to be savored and sins to be committed. And through it all, hidden away in the dusty attic, the portrait would bear silent witness to the corruption of his soul. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, a strange calm settled over him. The house was quiet, the world outside oblivious to the momentous change that had occurred within these walls. Dorian's hand brushed against the key in his pocket, and a thrill of anticipation coursed through him. 18 years, he whispered to himself, his eyes gleaming with unholy excitement. 18 years of freedom, of pleasure, of sin, all mine for the taking. Little did he know the depths of depravity and darkness that awaited him in the years to come, or the terrible price that would eventually be demanded for his infernal bargain. For 18 years, Dorian Gray lived a life of unrestrained pleasure and sin. His unchanging, youthful appearance served as an impenetrable shield, allowing him to indulge in the darkest of vices without consequence. London's underbelly became Dorian's playground, a world of shadows and secrets that welcomed him with open arms. The opium dens of the East End called to him, their hazy interiors a refuge from the weight of his actions. The sweet, cloying scent of smoke clung to his clothes as he lost himself in drug-induced dreams, his mind drifting far from the reality of his corrupted soul. But Dorian's pursuits weren't confined to these dark corners. He moved through London's high society like a dazzling butterfly, leaving a trail of broken hearts and shattered reputations in his wake. His beauty was intoxicating, his charm irresistible. Men and women alike fell under his spell, drawn to his ethereal looks and magnetic personality. Each scandalous affair added another layer to the hidden portrait of his soul, unseen by the world but growing more grotesque with each passing day. Dorian's home became a beacon for the young and beautiful, a glittering oasis in the heart of the city. The air thrummed with music and laughter, the rooms filled with the pop and fizz of champagne corks and the tinkling of crystal glasses. Rare and exquisite objects adorned every surface, a testament to Dorian's refined taste and seemingly endless wealth. Yet beneath this glittering facade, a current of corruption ran deep, poisoning all who dared to swim in its treacherous waters. Young men of good families, once full of promise, found themselves ruined after falling into Dorian's orbit. Their eyes, once bright with ambition, grew dull and haunted, as if they had gazed upon something too terrible to comprehend. Women who dared to associate with him found their reputations in tatters, their names whispered in drawing rooms with a mixture of pity and disdain. Dorian moved through their lives like a beautiful, destructive force of nature, leaving only wreckage in his wake. As the years passed, the rumors surrounding Dorian grew darker, more insidious. They slithered through London society like venomous snakes, poisoning the air wherever his name was mentioned. Yet protected by his angelic face and seemingly endless charm, Dorian remained untouchable, a golden god among mere mortals. In the privacy of his home, away from prying eyes, Dorian would stand before his hidden portrait. Each visit was a ritual, filled with equal parts dread and fascination. The painting had become a mirror to his soul, reflecting the true cost of his hedonistic lifestyle. Where once a beautiful young man had smiled from the canvas, now a monster leered back at him. The face was twisted and grotesque, every sin etched into its features like a roadmap of depravity. Eyes that had once sparkled with innocence now glowed with a malevolent light. The mouth, once soft and kind, had become cruel and sneering. With each passing year, the portrait grew more hideous, bearing the weight of every cruel word, every selfish act, every life Dorian had carelessly ruined in pursuit of his own pleasure. The painting was a silent accusation, a constant reminder of the rot that festered beneath Dorian's perfect exterior. Yet as the portrait decayed, Dorian himself remained unchanged. His skin was as smooth and unblemished as the day the painting was created. His golden hair still shone, his eyes still sparkled with youth and vitality. It was as if time itself had forgotten him, leaving him forever frozen in the bloom of his beauty. This unchanging appearance became both Dorian's greatest weapon and his heaviest burden. It allowed him to move through the world unchallenged, his angelic face a mask that hid the demon within. But with each passing year, the disconnect between his outward beauty and his inward corruption grew more pronounced, a chasm that threatened to swallow him whole. Dorian's heart, once capable of love and compassion, hardened like a stone. Empathy became a foreign concept, replaced by a cold, calculating selfishness. He viewed the world through a lens of pure self-interest, seeing others not as people, but as playthings to be used and discarded at will. The warmth that had once drawn people to him was replaced by a chilling emptiness, a void that no amount of pleasure could fill. As the 18th year drew to a close, Dorian stood once more before his hidden portrait. The face that stared back at him was barely recognizable as human, a nightmarish reflection of his corrupted soul. The eyes seemed to follow him, accusing and mocking. The twisted mouth seemed to whisper of all the sins he had committed, all the lives he had destroyed. Dorian turned away from the grotesque image, his own face in the mirror remaining as beautiful and youthful as ever. But as he prepared to face another day, another year of debauchery and deceit, a strange feeling of unease settled over him. The fog outside his window seemed to thicken, casting long shadows across his room. For the first time in 18 years, Dorian felt a chill of fear run down his spine. Something was changing, shifting beneath the surface of his carefully constructed world. As he stepped out into the fog-shrouded streets of London, the eve of his 38th birthday looming before him, Dorian couldn't shake the feeling that his long-delayed reckoning was finally at hand. The fog-shrouded streets of London were eerily quiet. It was the eve of Dorian Gray's 38th birthday, and he walked alone, lost in thought. The mist clung to his expensive coat, beating like tiny pearls on the dark fabric. Each step echoed hollowly against the cobblestones, the sounds swallowed by the thick, soupy air. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the gloom. Dorian's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the familiar face of Basil Hallward, the artist who had once captured his youthful beauty on canvas. Basil's eyes, wide with concern and a hint of fear, searched Dorian's face. "Dorian," Basil said, his voice barely above a whisper, carried on the damp air. "I've been hearing terrible things about you. Please tell me they're not true." Dorian's lips curled into a smirk, his handsome features betraying no sign of the corruption that lay beneath. His green eyes, once bright with innocence, now glittered with a dangerous light. "And what if they are, dear Basil? What then?" The artist's face fell, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his worry. The lines around his eyes deepened, etched by years of concern for his once-beloved subject. "You can't mean that, Dorian. The things they say, they speak of such depravity, such evil. This isn't the young man I once knew." A flicker of something, perhaps regret, perhaps anger, passed across Dorian's face. For a moment, he seemed to wrestle with a decision, his jaw clenching and unclenching. Then, with a sudden resolve, he grabbed Basil's arm, his fingers digging into the soft fabric of the artist's coat. "Come with me," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I'll show you the truth." The two men made their way through the misty streets, the fog swirling around their feet like ghostly tendrils. Dorian's townhouse loomed before them, a dark silhouette against the night sky. As they entered, the warmth of the interior did little to dispel the chill that had settled in Basil's bones. Dorian led the way up the stairs, each step creaking ominously beneath their feet. The sound seemed to echo Basil's racing heartbeat. The air grew thick with tension as they climbed higher and higher, finally reaching the attic door. Dorian's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the key, the metal cold against his skin. "Dorian," Basil pleaded one last time, his voice thick with emotion. "Whatever it is, it's not too late. We can make things right." But Dorian was beyond hearing. With a swift motion, he unlocked the door and flung it open. The room beyond was dark, save for a sliver of moonlight that fell across a shrouded object in the center. The air was heavy with dust and secrets. "You wanted the truth, Basil?" Dorian's voice was barely recognizable, twisted with a mixture of fear and madness. "Here it is!" He yanked away the covering, revealing the portrait that had once captured his youthful beauty. But now in its place was a nightmare made flesh. The face on the canvas was grotesquely aged, every sin and depravity etched into its features. The eyes, sunken and filled with malice, seemed to stare directly at Basil, boring into his soul. The artist recoiled in horror, his hand flying to his mouth to stifle a scream. The smell of old paint and decay filled his nostrils. "Dear God," he whispered, his voice trembling. "What have you done?" Dorian's laughter, high and hysterical, filled the room. It bounced off the walls, surrounding them like a cage of sound. "Don't you see, Basil? This is your masterpiece. This is what your art has wrought." Basil fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. The floorboards creaked beneath him, dust rising in small clouds. "Dorian, please," he begged, his words choked with sobs. "It's not too late. We can seek forgiveness. We can make amends. Let me help you." But something in Dorian had snapped. The weight of his sins, the years of deception, came crashing down upon him. In that moment, he saw Basil not as a friend, but as a witness to his shame, a living reminder of the innocence he had lost. With a snarl of rage, Dorian lunged for a nearby table, his hand closing around the handle of a knife. The metal gleamed dully in the moonlight. Before Basil could react, Dorian was upon him, the blade flashing in the dim light. Again and again Dorian struck, each blow fueled by a madness that had been years in the making. Basil's pleas turned to screams, then to whimpers, and finally to silence. The sound of tearing flesh and the dull thud of the knife filled the air, a horrific rhythm in the once quiet room. As the last echoes of the struggle faded away, Dorian stood over the body of the man who had once been his dearest friend. Blood dripped from his hands, each drop a testament to his final descent into darkness. The portrait loomed behind him, a silent witness to the final, irrevocable step that Dorian Gray had taken. Dorian's breath came in ragged gasps, the reality of what he had done slowly seeping into his consciousness. He looked down at his blood-stained hands, then back at the grotesque portrait. The eyes in the painting seemed to mock him, challenging him to face the consequences of his actions. Suddenly, a noise from downstairs jolted him back to reality. Footsteps echoed through the house, growing louder with each passing second. Panic gripped Dorian's heart as he realized he was no longer alone in the house. The door to the attic seemed to shrink away, becoming a distant point of escape as the footsteps drew ever closer. The opulent room, once a sanctuary of beauty and art, now felt suffocating. The air hung heavy with the metallic scent of blood, mingling with the lingering aroma of oil paints and turpentine. Dorian's eyes darted frantically, settling on the lifeless form of his friend. Basil's unseeing eyes seemed to accuse him, and the blood pooling on the Persian rug was a stark contrast to the refined elegance of the surroundings. Panic seized Dorian's heart, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The tick-tock of the ornate clock on the mantel echoed like a countdown, each second bringing him closer to discovery. He had to act, and quickly. In his desperation, a name surfaced from the depths of his memory. Alan Campbell, the brilliant chemist who had once been a close friend. Their relationship had fractured years ago, torn apart by unspoken tensions and diverging paths. Now Alan might be Dorian's only hope. With trembling hands, Dorian penned an urgent message, His usually elegant script was now a frantic scrawl, the ink blotching where his shaking fingers pressed too hard. The wait for Alan's arrival was excruciating. Dorian paced the room like a caged animal, his mind racing through increasingly dire scenarios. When Alan finally arrived, his face was a mask of reluctance and barely concealed disdain. The years had not been kind to him, etching deep lines of worry around his eyes. Dorian, in contrast, remained as youthful and beautiful as ever, a fact that seemed to deepen Alan's discomfort. "I need your help, Alan," Dorian said, his voice a mixture of charm and desperation. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken history. Alan's refusal was immediate and vehement. His eyes, once warm with friendship, now burned with a cold fury. But Dorian was prepared. Like a snake striking its prey, he lashed out with his secret weapon: blackmail. The words fell from his lips like poison, revealing a dark secret from Alan's past that threatened to destroy everything the chemist held dear. The color drained from Alan's face, leaving him ashen and defeated. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dorian led him to the room where Basil's body lay, watching as horror and revulsion washed over Alan's features. "I need you to make him disappear," Dorian said, his tone eerily calm. "Completely." Through the long night, Alan worked tirelessly. The acrid smell of chemicals filled the air, burning Dorian's nostrils and making his eyes water. He paced restlessly, alternating between watching Alan's progress and staring out the window, half expecting to see the police at any moment. The streets below were quiet, but to Dorian, every shadow seemed to hide an accuser. As dawn broke, Alan emerged from the room, a shell of the man who had entered. His eyes were hollow, haunted by the unspeakable task he had performed. Without a word he left, carrying the weight of complicity on his shoulders. In the days that followed, Dorian threw himself into his social life with renewed vigor. He attended parties, laughed with friends, and charmed everyone he met. But beneath the facade, a storm was brewing. Every whispered conversation became a potential threat. The portrait in the attic, already a grotesque reflection of his sins, now seemed to mock him with Basil's death. Dorian found himself avoiding mirrors, afraid to see the monster he had become reflected in his own eyes. At night, sleep eluded him. He would lie awake, replaying the murder in his mind, the sound of Basil's last gasp, the feeling of the knife in his hand. These sensations haunted him, turning his dreams into nightmares. He would wake in a cold sweat, the sheets tangled around him like accusing fingers. Despite his outward composure, Dorian found himself haunted by the memory of Basil and the knowledge of what he had become. The burden of murder weighed heavily on his conscience, adding a new layer of horror to his already corrupted soul. As the days wore on, the walls of his gilded cage seemed to close in around him. The parties, the laughter, the endless parade of beautiful faces, it all felt hollow, a desperate attempt to outrun the darkness within. But the darkness was winning. One night, as he stared at his reflection in a shop window, Dorian made a decision. He could no longer bear the weight of his conscience. With a heart heavy with guilt and a mind clouded by despair, he turned away from the glittering lights of high society and headed toward the shadowy alleys of London's underbelly, seeking an escape from the monster he had become. The grand halls of Selby Royal buzzed with activity as Dorian's aristocratic friends arrived for the weekend hunting party. Their forced laughter and idle chatter echoed through the opulent rooms, a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing within Dorian's soul. He had invited them in a desperate attempt to drown out the whispers of his conscience, to lose himself in the frivolous pursuits that had once brought him such pleasure. As dawn broke on the day of the hunt, a thick mist clung to the grounds like a shroud, mirroring the haze of guilt that clouded Dorian's mind. The air was crisp and biting, carrying the scent of damp earth and gunpowder. It filled his lungs with each shaky breath, a reminder of the fragility of life. Dorian stood at the edge of the woods, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped his rifle. The cold metal against his palms felt heavier than usual, as if burdened by the lives it had the power to take. The hunting party spread out across the estate, their excited voices and the baying of hounds shattering the morning stillness. Dorian moved mechanically, his thoughts far from the sport at hand. Every rustle in the undergrowth made him start, his imagination conjuring the vengeful face of James Vane in every shadow. The leaves crunched beneath his feet, each step feeling like a countdown to an inevitable confrontation. Suddenly, a shot rang out, louder and more final than the others. The excited shouts of the hunters turned to cries of alarm. Dorian's heart raced, pounding against his rib cage like a caged animal. He rushed toward the commotion, branches whipping against his face, leaving thin, stinging scratches. A sick feeling of dread and hope warred in his chest, making his stomach churn. There, sprawled on the forest floor, lay a man's body. As Dorian drew closer, his breath caught in his throat. The face, though slack in death, was unmistakable. James Vane, his would-be killer, now lay still and harmless at his feet. The man's eyes stared blankly at the canopy above, accusing even in death. A storm of emotions raged within Dorian. Relief washed over him like a cool wave, extinguishing the immediate threat to his life. Yet hot on its heels came a surge of guilt, burning and acrid. Though he had not pulled the trigger himself, Dorian felt the weight of yet another life lost because of his actions. The metallic scent of blood mingled with the earthy smell of the forest, turning his stomach. As the initial shock subsided and the authorities were called, Dorian retreated to the solitude of his study. The room, once a sanctuary of pleasure and beauty, now felt like a prison. The paintings on the walls seemed to stare accusingly, their eyes following him as he paced restlessly. The plush carpet muffled his footsteps, the silence broken only by his ragged breathing. The days following the hunting party dragged on, each hour feeling like an eternity. The house emptied of guests, their departure leaving a vacuum that seemed to suck the very life from the rooms. The silence that settled over Selby Royal was oppressive, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Each second echoed like a hammer blow, a reminder of the life he had wasted in pursuit of eternal youth and fleeting pleasures. Dorian found himself unable to enjoy the diversions that had once consumed him. His books lay untouched, their spines gathering dust. His music remained unplayed, the piano keys cold and silent. Even the exquisite meals prepared by his chef tasted like ash in his mouth, each bite a joyless act of sustenance. He was a man adrift, cut loose from the moorings of his hedonistic lifestyle, and left to face the stark reality of his choices. In the quiet moments of introspection, Dorian began to question everything. The face that stared back at him from the mirror was as youthful and beautiful as ever, but his eyes held a haunted look that no amount of artifice could hide. Dark circles had formed beneath them, a testament to his sleepless nights. He thought of Basil Hallward, of Sybil Vane, of countless others whose lives he had touched and tainted. The weight of his past pressed down on him like a physical thing, threatening to crush him beneath its burden. For the first time in years, Dorian allowed himself to contemplate the possibility of redemption. Could there be forgiveness for one who had strayed so far from the path of virtue? The idea of confessing his crimes, of seeking absolution, took root in his mind. It was a fragile seedling, struggling to grow in the barren soil of his soul, but it persisted. With each passing hour, it grew stronger, its tendrils reaching into every corner of his consciousness. As night fell on Selby Royal, Dorian stood at the window of his bedroom, gazing out at the moonlit grounds. The beauty of the scene before him seemed a cruel mockery of the ugliness within his heart. The silvery light bathed the landscape in an otherworldly glow, highlighting the stark contrast between the serene exterior and the turmoil within. He was torn between the siren call of his ingrained hedonism and the growing desire for moral salvation. The path ahead was unclear, shrouded in the mists of uncertainty and fear. In that moment, as the weight of his choices pressed down upon him, Dorian Gray seriously contemplated the idea of confessing his crimes and seeking forgiveness. The thought both terrified and exhilarated him, offering a glimmer of hope in the darkness that had become his life. His hand trembled as he reached for the bell pull, ready to summon his valet. The decision crystallized in his mind, sharp and clear as a diamond. He would confess everything, consequences be damned. As the bell's chime echoed through the house, Dorian's heart raced with a mixture of fear and anticipation. There was no turning back now. Guilt consumed Dorian Gray, gnawing at his very soul. Desperate for redemption, He made a fateful decision that would change everything. The old mansion creaked and groaned, as if sensing the weight of Dorian's sins. He stood at the foot of the narrow staircase leading to the attic, his heart pounding like a caged animal trying to escape. Each step felt like a mile as he ascended, the wood protesting beneath his feet. The musty air of the long-neglected attic hit him like a wall as he pushed open the door. Dust motes danced in the dim light filtering through grimy windows, swirling around him like accusatory spirits. And there it stood, a shrouded figure in the corner, waiting silently for its unveiling. Dorian's hands shook as he approached the covered portrait. The room seemed to close in around him, the air growing thick and oppressive. With a deep breath, he grasped the dusty cloth and yanked it away. The sight that greeted him was more horrifying than he remembered. The once handsome face was now a twisted mass of wrinkles and scars, a roadmap of every cruel deed and selfish thought. The eyes, sunken and filled with malice, seemed to follow him as he stumbled backward. "What have I become?" Dorian whispered, his voice cracking. The weight of his actions crashed over him like a tidal wave. Memories flashed through his mind. Faces of those he'd hurt, lives he'd ruined. The innocent young man he once was felt like a stranger, lost to time in his own depravity. His gaze fell upon the knife resting on a nearby table. The same blade that had ended Basil Hallward's life. It gleamed in the dim light, calling to him with a siren song of finality. Dorian's fingers closed around the handle, the cold metal a stark contrast to his feverish skin. Time seemed to slow as he raised the knife, its polished surface catching a stray beam of light. In one fluid motion, fueled by desperation and self-loathing, he plunged the blade into the canvas. A scream tore from his throat, echoing through the house. It was a sound of both agony and release, the death knell of a man who had lived far beyond his natural years. The knife clattered to the floor as Dorian stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock. A strange sensation rippled through his body, as if every cell was being rewritten. He watched in horror as his hands withered before his eyes, skin wrinkling and spots appearing. As life drained from Dorian Gray, the portrait shimmered and changed. The grotesque features melted away, replaced by the youthful, innocent face that had once captivated London society. It was as if time itself was being reversed, the painting absorbing the corruption that had defined Dorian's existence. Panicked footsteps thundered up the stairs as the servants, alerted by the unearthly scream, rushed to investigate. They pounded on the locked door, their voices muffled and distant to Dorian's fading senses. With his last ounce of strength, Dorian turned to face the portrait one final time. The young man in the painting smiled down at him, untouched by the passage of time or the weight of sin. A tear rolled down Dorian's now ancient cheek as he whispered, "Forgive me." The door burst open, and the servants recoiled at the sight before them. On the floor lay the body of an old man, twisted and disfigured beyond recognition. Only the familiar rings on his gnarled fingers hinted at his true identity. Beside him, the knife gleamed, its blade still wet. And there on the wall, restored to its original beauty, hung the portrait of Dorian Gray. The servants stood in stunned silence, unable to comprehend the transformation they had witnessed. In his final act, Dorian Gray had taken on the full burden of his sins. His physical form now reflected the true state of his corrupted soul, while the portrait returned to its pristine state, eternally young and innocent. The price of vanity and cruelty had finally been paid, leaving behind a mystery that would baffle those who discovered it for years to come. As the first rays of dawn crept through the attic windows, they fell upon the portrait of a beautiful young man, forever frozen in time. The servants whispered among themselves, trying to make sense of what they had seen, but some truths are too strange, too terrible to be believed. The legend of Dorian Gray would live on, a cautionary tale of the dangers of unchecked desire and the true cost of eternal youth.
This book was generated using Speaktor's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.